In saying that, who's going to be available for Noble? I think the straight swap is get someone like Di Mattia in. And finally, we talked about their inefficiencies going inside 50. They had 19 shots from 60 inside 50s, which is less than 33%, which is garbage. Garbage, and he's also averaging an extra shot per game this season, but he's still averaging the same amount of goals from last season. So without the Darcy Moores playing at an all-Australian level, the Pies don't make it to the grand final. Ladies and gentlemen, what is it going to take for Collingwood to figure out how to get rid of these complacent tendencies in games? My problem is, I don't think this is a quick fix, and this, it seems like something has been ingrained into the Collingwood culture. And as we said it before, we enjoy those close wins when we win, when we come from behind. But I feel like it's just finally catching up to us. And Fly mentioned it in his presser. He said, I don't know how much longer we can absorb this and how long we can be in a position where we're in second gear, or we're a couple levers behind where we need to be in games, because we know that we have the ability to come back. It's almost like this conceited mindset that we're better than teams when it comes to the nitty-gritty of the game, when it comes down to it in the final quarter. But it's not going to bode well for us moving forward, and it's time things change. How that changes, God knows. I've got no fucking clue how Fly addresses this in such a short span of time. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I don't want to be pessimistic looking into the future. It's looking bleak this year, right now. I just think there's so many spot fires once again in a very crucial period of our season. Your Darcy Moores, your half-back line issue. You've got Fly McRae having to make a bunch of changes with injuries in and out. And then obviously the dilemma we have with just leaving it too late, the comeback. The not having this relentless mindset from the moment the bounce happens in the first quarter. Anyhow, moving into this game against the Bombers on Friday night. Fortunately, the Bombers lost against Geelong in quite disappointing fashion. There was a lot of conversation, still is a lot of conversation regarding some of the umpiring calls and non-calls that happened throughout that game, and it's been interesting to keep a tab on. Hopefully that can deter them and keep their mind away from the game on Friday and give us a little edge. They lost, so we have another chance to remain in the top four. So while I am looking at the season in a negative sort of frame right now, for me personally, I just said there's a lot to overcome. We can still be relevant as far as the ladder's concerned if we can get a win on Friday night. So against the Bombers, we are undefeated in the last 5 against Essendon. So we had that draw against the Bombers on Anzac Day earlier this year. Some of the key moments, or yes, key outcomes from that game was how slow we were out of the gates in that game and how sharp Essendon were. And it was quite a stark contrast as to who wanted it more from the get-go. Zach Merritt was leading in the middle. Jake Stringer was unreal playing out of the middle. I think he had 15 contested possessions in that game and had a couple goals. And we had no matchups for him in the back line. So that was an observation that I took out of that game. I felt like obviously we bounced back early enough after being down 5 goals, and then we take the lead. And then as footy typically works and has its ways, there is a thing called momentum shifts, and they will come if you're that far behind and you get back in front. Something's going to change from the opposition, and Essendon responded. And then obviously we end up with a draw, and fortunate to come out with the draw given the slow start and given Kyle Langford had that opportunity to kick that goal. Yes, you can say, well, we almost had an opportunity to also kick away with Jamie Elliott on the break, going back the other way late in the game. Not to be. The draw was probably a fair result. Let's talk about some of the high performers in that game, or the pie performers, if you will. We've got Brody Myercheck. He had 8 shots on goal and kicked 3 goals. So he could have had an absolute field day and missed some real siders. So, you know, you make the case, Checkers kick straight and Collingwood maybe win that game. But that's just, I guess, what makes up the narrative of every game. Shoulda, coulda, woulda, but he didn't. So that's what it was at the end of the day. Darcy Moore had 23 touches and 5 intercept marks. Yes, please. Can I get more of that on Friday night, Darce? The only way to play Darcy right now is to play him through his form woes. Can you play him forward? I don't know who we're going to put in the back line in lieu of him. Nathan Kruger. Okay, you could go as far as to suggest maybe Dan McStay goes in the back line if Darcy Moore is too important of a player to not be having a positive impact in our squad. If he is not playing well, and he's one of the other reasons why I think it's looking not so good for Collingwood right now, is because without the Darcy Moores playing at an All-Australian level, the Pies don't make it to the grand final. I'm sorry for being the bearer of bad news, but this is just my mind rationalising what I'm seeing right now on the field, and it's just not enough. And if you disagree, maybe you're just delusional. So if previous performances are anything to go by, maybe Darcy Moore can take a leaf out of that page and have an impact. 23 touches, 5 intercept marks. He was over 85% disposal efficiency for that game. Give me some of that, Darcy. Give me some of that. And Bobby Hill, 3 shots, 3 behinds. So we've been talking about his misfortunes in front of goal. He's averaging less than 20%. He's averaging 20% lower in goal scoring accuracy relative to last year. He's also averaging an extra shot per game this season, but he's still averaging the same amount of goals from last season. So last season he had 1.4, this season he had 1.4, he's currently on 1.4. So he can easily get that to 2. He really can. With the amount of shots he's having on goal last week, or last Saturday against the Suns, he had 5 shots on goal, only kicked 1 from, it's a poor return. But plenty to like from Bobby, and I think he's going to turn that corner eventually. And he had that 5-goal effort against North, could have had another bag against Gold Coast. Hopefully against Essendon he can do something a little bit more. However, guys, just quickly, it shouldn't go unnoticed that what Bobby Hill is able to do from a goal providence element is really impressive this year. He's averaging over a goal assist a game. Last season was less than half a goal assist. And I think he had 3 goal assists against the Suns. So we do love that from Bobby, but we also want to see some goals. Call me greedy, but I just want to see a couple more goals go through the big 6 for Bobby Hill leading into the final series. For the Bombers, Kyle Langford was also unstoppable. He had 4 goals. Could have probably won the medal if he had kicked that final shot on goal that he missed. Zach Merritt was unreal, had the 10 coaches' votes, was running both ways, applying defensive pressure, and was really good in the link-up passages. We had Andrew McGrath, who had 30 touches off halfback as well, so going to have to put a little bit of work into him this weekend. Now let's look at some of the stats from Essendon's last 5 matches and Collingwood's last 5 matches. Essendon are plus 37 in uncontested possessions, so similar sort of profile to Gold Coast, who like to, I guess, not over-possess the ball with hand passes, but be able to link up in transition through their handball work, and that's something Essendon do really, really well. Conversely, Collingwood concede a lot of uncontested possessions. It was evident against Gold Coast. We're minus 45 right now, and a lot of those possessions that we were conceding were handball passages or just allowing too many easy chip kicks from Gold Coast to allow them to slowly move up the ground. So that's something we're going to have to be extremely cognizant of on Friday night, because we just can't let them get off the chain and be comfortable and waltz their way through the middle of the ground with uncontested possession. It will just kill us in a hurry. Once again, similar to Gold Coast, Essendon have been earning a lot of inside 50 entries. They're currently averaging 60 inside 50s per game in the last 5 matches. However, they're scoring less than 40% of the time when they go into their inside 50, which is worse than what Gold Coast had. But then we see Gold Coast come in against the Pies and they completely just turn that on its head and they score nearly 50% of the time. So I'm hoping that that stat can remain true for Essendon for the sake of Collingwood, that they don't have much efficiency going inside 50. But that will come down to matchups and also just the really narrowing on our system and ensuring our zone is up to scratch and everything else in between. And on the other hand, we know when Collingwood go back the other way, we're extremely efficient going inside 50, scoring close to 50% of the time we go in there. However, the only issue is at the moment in the last 5 matches, we're in the bottom 4 for inside 50 entries. So we're just not getting it in there enough. So that's another thing that Flyer probably needs to figure out. What's it going to take to get more entries? And I know historically, maybe the Pies, even last year, we were a top 6 side for inside 50 entries, but right now, bottom 4 is not going to be enough to get, I guess, enough opportunities in front of goal. As far as the score sources are concerned, I'm not going to dive too deep into that just because Collingwood and Essendon share similar profiles and they're all really in the last 5 matches, considering we're both on slides, it's all around the mark, the average mark at AFL standard, if not a little bit beneath that. So just keep that in mind. I remember going into that Anzac Day clash, Bombers and Pies were 1 and 2 respectively for tackles in the league. Nothing's changed. In the last 5 matches, they're also top 2 for tackling in the last 5 matches. So it's going to be a high energy game and crash and bash, and there's going to be a lot of tackles applied, and hopefully Collingwood can stick some tackles. Something that might be more pertinent to the conversation regarding score sources is how vulnerable the Bombers were against the Cats, and we can look at the score sources there. I think that will get us give us a better gauge rather than me just whacking off some general score source numbers over the last 5 matches, which may not be extremely relevant. The best thing to look at is Essendon's most recent week, and that was against the Cats. They were minus 45 from turnover, conceding 73 points from turnover, and the AFL average is sitting at 48. So it was a complete shellacking when it came to that domain. They were minus 47 from defensive half, so Geelong were back to their best, where we saw them early in the year, particularly against your Carltons, where they just moved the ball so well and played high up the ground and then moved in transition in that counter-attack very swiftly, and Essendon were obviously not able to handle that. They did score 3 goals from centre bounce, which is well above average, is elite, really. It was 18 points to 12, so Geelong had their fair share as well, so probably something to earmark and hope Essendon aren't scoring more than 2 goals, which is the AFL average when it comes to centre bounce. They're going to have players like Zach Merritt rolling through there, Jake Stringer as well, so hopefully we can quell that. And finally, we talked about their inefficiencies going inside 50. They had 19 shots from 60 inside 50s, which is less than 33%, which is garbage. Garbage, and look, I didn't watch the game entirely, so maybe you guys can talk to what happened. Where were they so poor going inside 50? Why have they been so poor in the last 5 matches? I can only watch so many games, and Collingwood is my bread and butter, and I really don't care too much for other teams if Collingwood aren't involved, besides when we're coming into a game against them in an upcoming round. Players to keep an eye on from the Geelong-Essendon game moving into this game. Jai Caldwell, guys. 32 touches, 12 clearances, 18 contested possessions. He was basically the only player, or one of the only players from Essendon who really could leave that game with their head held high. He only had 25% centre bounce attendances against Collingwood on Anzac Day. This game, rather, he had 90% centre bounce attendances. So we're actually going to get a different looking force in the midfield when it comes to Essendon on Friday night. It's not going to be quite the same. You can probably make the same case for Collingwood, with Jack Crisp obviously returning to a more full-time basis in the middle. So maybe that looks a little bit different from Essendon's perspective as well. Dyson Heppel in his 200th had 22 touches, and guys, Harrison Jones had 4 intercept marks, so I can only assume he played inside 50. He didn't have any shots on goal. He had a few kicks going inside 50, so that's an interesting change-up because he is typically a forward. So I'm intrigued to see how that move plays out for Essendon if that's the case. Now, selection talk. We're going to talk injuries first. We've got John Noble, who is out with a concussion, and to be truthful, I feel like he's been on a little bit of a slide form-wise. Compared to his game against Hawthorn, his game against Brisbane, his milestone game against Adelaide, where he was absolutely outstanding, things are looking a little bit different. So maybe, obviously I wish him well and I hope he recovers from the concussion, but maybe the time out of the game, next week or so, will help reinvigorate him and find that form where he's averaging 25 touches a game. He's getting 4 or 5 score involvements per game as well. In saying that, who's going to be available for Noble? I think the straight swap is get someone like Di Mattia in and just blood him in now. He's obviously got that paced off halfback, has great leadership quality. He's been doing well in the VFL. He's earned an MVP performance. Get him in. I think it's a nice like for like. The other injury, Beau McCreery with the calf injury, unfortunate. Didn't have a great impact. Was a bit sloppy with his disposal and got caught holding the ball, but limited opportunity due to that injury. Obviously, the straight swap there is Lachie Schultz, so we'll leave that at that. We really missed Lachie Schultz when it came to defending our front half from Gold Coast transition. So I will be welcoming back Lachie Schultz with open arms. Now, as far as omissions are considered, I've got a few in mind. But I'm also mindful that not all of these should occur because I don't want to make too many changes once again like Fly did last week. I thought that really hurt us. But one of them that has to happen is Billy Frampton out for Charlie Dean. I gave Billy Frampton a 0 out of 10 in the Pie Performers live stream last night. I watched back the game. He was literally accountable for 8 goals in that game, where you could say, yep, okay, an ineffective spoil, should have swallowed that mark, poor tackle, didn't keep the ball in when he should have. He handballs it out into space, and then Gold Coast feast on it and they scored directly from that. So his worst game by far for the club. I think we've seen his ceiling and we've seen his worst. I think it's time to give Charlie Dean that opportunity where we persevere through Charlie Dean's bad games and see what he's about. Look, yes, he was undersized against a Sam Darcy. He didn't play that well. But you take the good with the bad. Nathan Murphy is a similar size to Charlie Dean. And we played relatively short last year with that in consideration. So we weren't dependent on having another 6'6" player stand with Darcy Moore like we have with Billy Frampton this year. Last year, it was Darcy Moore, Nathan Murphy, and Jeremy Howe. So relatively undersized when it came to picking up that second key tall. So that's why I think now's a chance to be optimistic. And Dean was finding he was actually on an upwards trajectory in my opinion when it came to his form. So I'd welcome his number back against Essendon and see how we go. The other 2 omissions that I would certainly be considering, I think Markov for a TJ, although I think that's less likely just because we don't want to have too many changes and we still need some sort of maturity in the team. So Markov maybe holds his position, and TJ, if Markov doesn't hold his position, I think a TJ can come into the squad. The other one, which I think is very likely, is Lockie Sullivan for Ned Long or Reef McInnes. Lockie Sullivan had fuck all centre-backs attendance percentage on the weekend, 25% give or take, which means he played a lot of his time on the wing, in the forward line, and had nil impact. If we're going to play someone like Lockie Sullivan in the forward line, you may as well bring a Reef McInnes in, or a Ned Long, who's a midfield beast, but also scores goals. I think he's averaging more than a goal a game in their VFL playing as a midfielder. So that's something worth consideration going into the game on Friday night. Moving on to the matchups of the game, I'm looking forward to seeing Darcy Moore on your Peter Wrights and Jake Stringers. I don't want to see Jeremy Howe on a Jake Stringer. I think one-on-one there's too much of a strength differential there. Charlie Dean and Quaynor are probably the more suitable matchups for Stringer. Try Charlie Dean on Stringer first, see how that goes. If that doesn't work out, maybe try Quaynor. And then Lockie Schultz to provide some sort of run-with role when it comes to McGrath. Although Lockie Schultz has been playing as a deeper forward. So we'll see how that ends up transpiring. Maybe Shooter can play higher up for that ground, play more of a Bo McCreary role in this game, allow Joe Richards to play a bit deeper, or vice versa, and see how that goes. So the main outcomes from this game is Collingwood just need to win. That's the matter of fact. Collingwood need to win to keep their finals hopes alive while we try to fix some of these spot fires that are occurring in the background. How do we fix our complacent tendencies? How do we get Darcy Moore back into form? Who can be his dance partner as a key size defender? Who's going to play off the half back line without John Noble, without Nick Dacos there, without Jack Crisp there? Maybe we're going to see one of those players play through that at some point. Lots to be left wondering about this game and how it's going to go. I'm nervous. I'm being real that I'm not confident, but it's fortunate that we're playing against another side who is in a precarious situation, although not similar to ours, but similar in its own sense that they're down in form. They're not looking like a top 4 side right now, and they've got questions that need answering as well. So it's going to be a massive game, guys. Go Pies.